Good morning, friends. Welcome to the second edition of the Heritage Series lecture. And today we have showcasing the Department of Orthopaedics. So may I invite Dr. Alfred Daniel, who will moderate today's session, with the key speaker being Dr. Samuel Chittaranjan. Over to sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ebby. Good morning and a very warm welcome to this Heritage Lectures. It's indeed a great pleasure for us to be standing here and then recounting the past, the glorious past of orthopedics. Orthopedics, as the name suggests, world over started off as correcting deformities in children. Whereas in CMC, I would like to believe that it came as a response to correcting deformities in patients with leprosy. I think that's where it started. And then now what you see before you yourself is a huge banyan tree that has spread its branches wide and covering a whole lot of specialties. We are easily ranked one among the top 5 every year by neutral magazines. We have come thus far. That is because we stand on the shoulder of giants. And we have one such giant with us to talk to us about the heritage. I'll talk to you more about him soon. So from the days of Hansen's deformity corrections, we have now branched off into multiple specialties, and the latest addition being the robot. So we are up to date with the rest of the world, and in fact, leading in many fields. Now, the moment you think about an orthopedic surgeon, the image that comes to your mind are tall, hefty, burly, handsome guys. Over the years, that image has slowly become better and better and better. So in the late 1980s, we had a group of very handsome young men coming into CMC leading orthopedics. Dr. G.T. Sundarraj, Professor Anderson, Dr. Ravi Korla, and Dr. Samuel Chittaranjan. They changed the image of the typical orthopedic surgeon into one of being a suave, classy, and very refined specialty. And I'm really indeed happy to have Professor Sam Chittaranjan with us today. He has literally bridged across the various generations and is the appropriate person to take us through the heritage of what it was and also to praise God for what it is now. Sir, I welcome you.
Thank you, Dr. Alfred, and thank you, all of you, for coming this morning. I must confess that what I'm going to share with you is my perspective of what it was that brought us here. And I must thank the department for giving me this very, very unique privilege of sharing some thoughts about the heritage of orthopedics. As I got into it, I found that it is going to be a very difficult job for me to do because there is so much. And where do you begin? And more importantly, where do you end? As you delve into all the things that went into our heritage and we look back, there was so much, and we owe so much to our pioneers who began the Department of Orthopaedics here. And truly, this is only a snapshot of what our heritage is and has been. So forgive me for making a certain personal choice of what to present here. And it is by no means comprehensive, because that will take several lectures, I think. So with that, let me get into the presentation. So I was, as I was wondering how to do the presentation, this verse from book Prophet Isaiah 51 came to my mind. Look to the rock from which you were cut. And I think when we look at orthopedics, I wonder whether we know the rock from which we were cut. Of course, the context of that quotation is that Prophet was calling a wayward nation back to its roots. He was calling them to look at Abraham, from whom they had come, and how they had forgotten the root. And that was a call that was badly needed. I don't think that I am here to suggest that we need that kind of a call. It's quite the opposite. We have built so very well on the foundations that were laid for us over the years. But nevertheless, the idea is that we should look at our founders, the foundation, the rock from which we have been cut. There is a question, is there anything to be gained from looking back? Shouldn't we be looking forward, especially in today's way of thinking? What we ought to be doing is to looking not only at today, but at tomorrow, and it is not much profit for us to be looking back. I suppose it depends on what we are looking at. There are many things that we can look at as we look back. And sometimes, as I say, if you're looking at your own shadow, you might be frightened by it sometimes. And that would serve no good purpose. But if we look back and we see the spring from which the river is flowing, there would be something to gain from that. And these words, inspiration, vigor, vitality, direction, commitment, purpose, and meaning becomes more evident. Because one of the things in this busy modern life is that we are so busy with doing things that sometimes you suddenly realize, why am I doing all this? You know, probably stress catches up at some point, and you ask yourself the question. And so it would be good to look at from where we have been cut, so that we will gain inspiration, we will be vitalized, we will learn more about the directions, and we can continue to be committed to our purpose and add meaning to our lives. Elon Musk is very much in our thinking these days, you know. He seems to be saying and doing lots of things. And of course, when you think of Elon Musk, you think of Tesla. It is a surprise that Tesla was founded by two guys, Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, who were Silicon Valley engineers, and they founded this electric car company back in 2003. They decided to name their company Tesla because of this man called Nikola Tesla, a Serbian American. Probably he didn't play tennis those days. That's why he went into other things. So he was an inventor, a kind of a maverick, actually. He thought always out of the box. And he even thought about wireless systems to manipulate vehicles and ships and so forth. Somebody who thought very much ahead, because he lived in the late 19th century and early 20th. And he was a specialist in electricity and some of the AC current mechanisms were actually invented by him. So Tesla is a fitting heritage for what is today a $1 million electric company, one of the few $1 trillion companies that carries his name, Tesla. Now, let us look at our heritage here in orthopedics. Who started orthopedics in Vellore? I wonder if many of us would be able to say who. I don't think it's that difficult. There weren't that many. But if there are any postgraduates here, that might be a question we can ask them. And I wonder whether they would know the answer. Any postgraduates here? Oh, good, good. So we have one there. So please tell us, who do you think started orthopedics here? Absolutely, wonderful. Thank you. So it was Dr. Paul Brand. You got it right. I hope you know something more about Dr. Paul Brand. When did it start? That would be a more difficult question, right? Long before you were born, obviously. So I won't ask you that question. And it was in the year 1948. And that's, of course, the picture of Dr. Paul Brand, Paul Wilson Brand. And these words were taken from his own writings. He has written some very wonderful books. One of that is 10 Fingers for God. And the other is The Gift That Nobody Wants. The Gift That Nobody Wants. Anybody from hand surgery here? I don't know. So you can guess, what is this gift that nobody wants? Pain, of course, pain. And we in orthopedics are always dealing with pain. Pain here, there, everywhere, but pain is our main job. And Paul Brand, when he began, as Dr. Alfred said, it was with leprosy. The main problem was there was no pain. And all the problems that he saw and what was happening to these unfortunate people was because they had no pain. And so he wrote a wonderful book called The Gift That Nobody Wants. And some of the things that I gleaned from that book, I've tried to put it here before you. So he came to Vellore in 1947. We'll talk a little bit about Dr. Paul Brand. And of course, he was a general surgeon. He was a general surgeon. Some of our earliest founders were general surgeons because that was what it was. There was no orthopedic surgery, at least in this part of the country and many regions of the world. General surgeons were doing all the surgeries in various parts of the body. And Dr. Brand talks about drunk with the adventure of real medicine. I wonder whether I can call myself drunk with the adventure of medicine. Do you? When I was in CMC, that was some years ago, I used to say that, it's a funny thing. They are paying me for doing something that I enjoy doing. Have you ever thought of yourself like that? You're getting paid for something you enjoy doing anyway. So Paul Brand was somebody who really epitomized the adventure of doing medicine. But as he says, as we read that, from 1948, he started to specialize in orthopedics. I don't know why. He doesn't say in his book why. Sometimes when you come for your MS interview, they say, why do you want to be an orthopedic surgeon or something like that? You'll have to think of some, answers to that. They might not be real answers anyway, but he decided to specialize in orthopedics. I don't know. And he does say that he enjoyed treating people with clubfoot. And there's a reason why Paul Brand took up treatment of clubfoot. We'll come to that in a minute. Incidentally, in this thing about questions about long time ago, the Indian Orthopedic Association, when was it formed? Formed in the year 1955, but remained part of the Association of Surgeons of India till 1986. And the reason why I put it there was I discovered that the idea of forming IOA was mooted in Vellore. There was an ASI meeting here in CMC where the idea of forming the Indian Orthopedic Association was mooted, 1952. 1952. I remember that when I was attending one of the annual meetings, I think either 1982 or 83, orthopedics was still a chapter of the ASI. And it was only thereafter that we separated and said we won't be part of the ASI. You know, one of the things of being with the ASI is that you got no food. You finished your program, you rushed to the food place. There was no food. These guys simply ate it all up. So thank God that we came out and we don't have to fight with the surgeons over food. Now, let's go back to Paul Wilson Brand. He was not born in the UK. He was born in what is called the Kulli Hills. That's the Parni range of hills in the southern part of Tamil Nadu, Kulli Hills. And he happened to be born there because his parents, Jesse and Evelyn Brand, were missionaries serving there. I wonder whether we had ever heard of Kulli Hills. That's a big subject, but I just suffice to say, why is it called Kulli Hills? That's a Tamil word. Kollum Malai. That means hills that kill. That's what is Kulli Hills, not some fancy thing. Hills that are really death. And you know why that was so? Because malaria was rampant. Malaria was rampant, and that's why Jesse and Evelyn Brand decided to go there. They lived there. They built a little hut. They lived there, and they cared for people in those hills. Why? There was nobody else doing that job. And so Paul was born in Kulli Hills. But then, as with all missionary families, he was shunted off to England for schooling. And after he finished his schooling, Paul Brand didn't want to have anything to do with medicine. Does it sound familiar? There was another founder who had such feelings. You know who? Aunt Ida didn't want anything to do with India or with medicine. And so was Paul. So he did something. He went into the building trade. For 5 years, he trained in carpentry, architecture, stonemasonry, and things of that sort. And he finished all those 5 years of training in England in the building thing, and he became a builder, building buildings. Then something happened, and his father died. Jesse Brand died in Kulli Hills of what was called the Blackwater fever, and you know what it is. Falciparum malaria. And he was buried there in Kulli Hills, and his mother continued a sacrificial service in those hills. The missionary organization said, come back, Evelyn, you are not fit to be there. Come back to England, but she refused. Her husband had committed his life to work there, and so she said, I will fulfill what my husband wanted to do. And therefore, Evelyn Brand continued her work even after her husband was gone. And the story of Granny Brand, as she came to be called, is a whole lecture by itself. A wonderful, wonderful saint of God. And it is heartening to see how one human being could give her whole life. She lived and worked there till she was 96 years old. And it's amazing, amazing. So against his natural desires, there was this call of heritage for Paul because of his parents. And so he decided to do some work in India, not in the medical field. He wanted to say, okay, my parents were missionaries. My father gave his life there. Let me go back to the mission field. So at that time, they were expected to have a crash course in basic medical training for all missionaries. So he enrolled in that. And that happened to be a turning point. Long story short, during the training, this crash course, he decided to become a proper doctor. So he enrolled in the University College London. He studied and became a young doctor. And we read that in World War II in London, as a medical student, during the London Blitz, and buildings being blown up by the rockets and so on, Paul was there tending to the injured as a medical student. He finished his surgical residency in the 1946. And at the end of the war, they were all supposed to work for the War Office. These people were shunted off to overseas places to continue the work as the War Office deemed fit. And so Paul Brand was expecting to be shunted somewhere, some part of the world. But then enter this man called Dr. Robert Cochrane, a Scotsman who was working in India, and he was a leprologist of renown. He was an expert in leprosy, and he was the one who introduced dapsone for the treatment of leprosy. Unless you are involved with medicine or with dermatology, I don't think you'll ever get to be using dapsone. In the old days, they had things like shalmogra oil and all kinds of things that really didn't work very well. But dapsone changed everything in leprosy. And this man, Dr. Robert Cochrane, was responsible for that. He heard from Granny Brand about her son in London. And so he traveled to London, convinced Paul to come to India. And he was able to convince the War Office that the need of the medical college in Vellore was more than the need of the empire. And he was able to convince them, and Paul was released to work in the Vellore Medical College. And of course, incidentally, Dr. Robert Cochrane was for a while director of Preston Medical College. And there are lots of things that happened because that is the leprosy connection. Remember, at this time, Paul Brand had nothing to do with leprosy, nothing to do with leprosy. And this is a picture of Granny Brand, that little old lady there, and you see those two sticks. After her husband died, she became so weak and enfeebled, and she couldn't walk properly. So she walked with two sticks, hunched up. She, as her son says, she became prematurely old. And so Paul Brand says, my mother, who was tall and beautiful and vigorous, became a shadow of her former self after her husband, Jesse, died. But with all that, she continued to work and work for another 40 plus years in the hills. So that was Evelyn Brand. Now, back to Paul Brand. So Paul Brand joined the Department of Surgery in 1947. 48, he took up orthopedics. And I wanted to, tell you that he set up the clubfoot clinic in 1948. When I came to orthopedics here in the year 1977, that same clubfoot clinic was running. That's the connection. Paul Brand set it up in 1948. And possibly the reason why he did that was his connection with Gosh, Great Ormond Street Hospital. Most orthopedic surgeons know what is the Great Ormond Street Hospital, right? The world-renowned pediatric hospital which did everything for children. It was a children's hospital specializing in cancer care and everything, including orthopedics, of course. They pioneered heart-lung transplant many, many years ago. And so it was an institute of renown. And so he worked under this man. This name, I'm sure, sounds familiar to all of us, Dr. Dennis Brown at Gosh. And Paul Brand describes that he was a huge man, and his thumb was as big as the baby's feet he was manipulating. And he had a way, Thomas will be interested to hear this, that in one go, he completely manipulated the foot straight. And it was casted. So that was the Dennis Brown technique. So he was able to do that. But Paul Brand noted that the older patients who were on follow-up, he found that their feet was plantigrade, but very stiff, very stiff. And I think even today we see that sometimes when you don't do the job properly, and the foot is straight but stiff, and you have a bad Pirani score. So Paul Brand decided that he shouldn't be doing that. So he developed an atraumatic technique of manipulation and serial casting to reduce scarring. And somewhat like the kites method, but Brand's own technique of how to manipulate it without tearing tissues. And you must read it in his book. I think it would be taking too much time to tell you how. So the connection with Dr. Cochrane, Dr. Robert Cochrane, he would take Paul Brand to the Chengalpat Leprosy Hospital, 1,000-bed Chengalpat Leprosy Hospital run by him. Dr. Cochrane was the advisor to the government of Madras and to the central government on matters of leprosy. And so while he was there and he saw all these deformed hands and feet, but a lot of the hands, he wanted to figure out why. Nobody knew about that. Why were these people getting deformed hands? And the impression was that leprosy by itself caused these deformities, caused the absorption of the fingers and the toes and so on. It is amazing that at that time, it was all thought like that. But Brand was not satisfied with that answer. So one day he got an opportunity to do a leprosy on a patient who had just died. And he spent the whole night doing the autopsy. He dissected out the nerves of the upper limbs, the face, and everywhere. And he discovered that the muscles were looking healthy. Everything was healthy except the nerves. The ulnar nerve thickened at the elbow and the median nerve at the wrist and many things. So it taught him that this was primarily because of involvement of the nerves. The rest of the tissues were normal. So it is something that Brand discovered for himself, and very much against current medical wisdom decided to do something about it. He decided to operate on deformed leprosy hands. But he started with first manipulation and casting to stretch out deformed fingers, and then he devised his tendon transfers. Okay. So initially he had nobody to follow or to base his approach here. He had to devise his own plans. And so he took a long time over these. And you know who was the anesthetist? The patient. He didn't have any feelings, so Paul Brand could operate on these fellows. Now, we never would do that, even on leprosy patients. You know, we always had either an axillary block or something given and then operate on them. But then, this was years ago, and so his initial cases was long because he had to figure out how much tension to put in and how to, you know, tunnel the new tendons and so on. So that was how Brand started. And it is amazing that he had absolutely no training in hand surgery. Sure, he worked with clubfoot surgeons, but hand surgery was not known. But he did all this without knowing that. But many years later, he had a fellowship, and then he visited many of the eminent hand surgeons in America, many years later. So to bring it short, we know about the extensor flexor foretail and the extensor foretail surgery for correction of claw hand. And of course, I have read it in the old surgery textbook called Bailey and Love. I think today you don't have this book, probably. It's gone out of print, maybe, but that used to be the standard textbook of surgery. And Paul Brand of Vellore Medical College was printed in that book. So Brand was the first head of the department. I'm not quite sure whether it was 52 or 57. There is a little question about that, but long years ago, he was the first head of the department. And it's also worth mentioning about the association of Dr. Ernest Ritchie. Anybody in hand surgery will have to know this name. Dr. Ernest Ritchie was the one who was the director and CEO of the Karigiri Hospital. Apart from a few other things, he was also the pastor who ran the St. John's Church. But he was a surgeon par excellence, and he was Brand's assistant in the old days. And Fritchie's textbook, a little booklet actually on hand surgery, was available in our library. Beautiful book. Now, some pictures here. You see a picture of Paul Brand as he visited later on in the year 1967. Just to mention that he used to come even when I was a student here in the late 70s and early 80s. He would come and talk about muscle spindle. He was at that time doing research in Carville in USA. And he would talk about muscle spindle. And for the first time, we heard that when a muscle unit contracts, it actually loses sarcomeres. That was Paul Brand's discovery. And when you stretch it out slowly and you restore the length, the sarcomeres are added back on to the muscle tendon unit. So it was amazing. So he was into a great deal of research even in the later times. And we always look forward to Dr. Brand's visit so that we could hear from the master himself about these sort of things. Some notable visitors during that time, you see Dr. Paul Brand and you see Dr. Jacob Koshi. Dr. Jacob Chandy, and former principal and director and all the rest of it. Dr. Jacob Chandy, father of Dr. Matthew Chandy, and so on. So Paul Brand there, and this is Dr. Rajkumari Amrit Kaur. She was the first health minister of independent India. And she was a practicing Christian. And we are told that Jawaharlal Nehru relied on her for the Christian inputs into his Council of Ministers. So she was not only a practicing Christian, but was a voice for the Christians in India at that time. And she was incidentally also responsible for setting up the AIMS Delhi. So she was a very eminent person, and here she is opening up this thing. I couldn't read clearly what that was, and she was there from 1947 to 1957 in the cabinet, and I suppose it was during that time she came to open a new project in Vellore. Now, again, this is somebody many of you may not know. This gentleman here, anybody can identify that person? That is Dr. Shanti Fen, former principal and head of Department of Surgery. And this is Dr. Dicky Marman, as he was those many years ago. He looked very different at the time when I knew him, and who became the first head of the Department of Pediatric Surgery here. Right, this is an important picture. This is actually Aunt Ida's cottage being taken through Vellore, as we can see there, and this is Paul Brand walking ahead in front. I put it there just because of that connection with Paul Brand. And this is another notable person, Dr. Sushila Nair. She came for the inauguration of the new neurology block here in Vellore. She was also a very important government personality. And so at that time, we had these eminent people coming here for many of the things that we did, because those things that happened in CMC were very important for the entire country, as you know. And of course, the unmistakable appearance of Dr. Radhakrishnan, who also graced our institute at that time, Dr. Jacob Chandy there, with Paul Brand. And this is another person that we all should know, Dr. Mary Verghese. This was the groundbreaking function for the Rehab Institute at that time. And of course, you see Paul Brand there and Dr. Mary Verghese. Her story is again another whole thing that we need to read and know. How she carried on even though she was quadriplegic. So now we're coming to the 70s, and I think I have better speed up. The time of Dr. Selvapandian and Dr. Daniel, and these were the two bosses that I knew very well because I worked under them. Ambrose James Selvapandian, 1923 to 2011. And all these things. Founder member of the Indian Orthopaedics Association, vice president of the IOA, president of the TNOA. Of course, this traveling fellowship was instituted in the year 1995. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award from Oasis at the Oasis Con in Kochi in the year 2010. Founder president of the Indian Society for Surgery of Hand. So all of these things was Dr. AJS. Recipient of the BC Roy National Award, member of many subcommittees for the World Health Organization, appointed by WHO to visit institutions in India to teach, demonstrate surgery and promote rehabilitation. Was member of the TGS working group for poliomyelitis. I think that's really what I wanted to mention. Not only was Dr. Selvapandian something to do with leprosy, and we'll come to how AJ's got into leprosy, but he was also involved with polio deformity correction. And when we were students and in the early years, we had to deal with a lot of post-polio residual paralysis Fortunately, we don't see it now. Do we see any of them, Thomas? I don't think so. Thank God for that. And we would spend a lot of time, but also very gratifying. These children who would come crawling on all fours or even dragging themselves on their buttocks. And they were looking at the world from ground level. And so one of the things that happened when we straightened out the deformities, put them into calipers and made them stand up, they were at face level to you. So it made a great difference to these unfortunate children. So it was a very meaningful and satisfying job trying to do this for these children. So Dr. AJ's MS General Surgery at Stanley, he was from Tuticorin and interested in general surgery, but his father-in-law was a doctor who cared for leprosy patients. So AJ's connection was his father-in-law. And after his medicine, he worked for his father-in-law for a year. And there he met another notable name, Howard Somerville. I don't know if anybody has heard of him here. Dr. Howard Somerville was a very, very interesting person. And he was also head of Department of Surgery here at one time. But Somerville met AJS in Palayamkotte or someplace like that, deep south. And he was instrumental in bringing AJS to Vellore. And so AJS came to CMC at the instance of Dr. Somerville. And when he came here, he was fascinated by Paul Brand's work and joined the Department of Orthopaedics in the year 1956, still many, many years ago. So AJS became part of orthopedics in 1956. I don't know how many years now you would compute. And he became head of the department in 1963, many, many, many years ago. The AJS I knew was an artist with the knife. He was an artist. Every movement was poetry. Even skin retraction had to be done just so. And if you didn't do it right, you got your hands, knuckles wrapped with the closest instrument. And if it was a hammer, you got really hammered. So even skin retraction had to be done just so. And soft tissue handling, boy, he was an artist. And some of the things that rubbed off on me was because I saw Dr. AJS handling soft tissues so gently. Holding the scissors was another art form. It had to be ergonomic and well controlled. The technique of surgery. It's a sadly deficient thing these days, I think. We need to really give importance to how we handle these things. And the other thing about Dr. AJS is minimally invasive surgery. Hand surgery was done by small, tiny incisions because he said long incisions will make for adhesions. So he did that surgery with, his hand surgery with tiny incisions here and there. And today, when I look at some so-called hand surgeons in some places who slash the whole arm from, elbow to wrist, I shudder. So anyway, he was very unassuming, but very much the boss, very much the boss. And so when he came back from doing something for the WHO, we knew chief is around, and we really had to be on our toes. And we were sure that, if he did not like what he saw, he will get the wrong end of his tongue. Now, one of the things about those days was these surgical camps. And that was the Volkswagen van that was part of the hand unit. And we were bundled into that early on Saturday morning, and we went off to operate all over the countryside. And you started operating 6 in the evening till 6 in the morning next day. And then you had a great and awesome breakfast after that. And that made up for all the hard work that went in there. So, so these were things that happened because there were so many who needed surgery and all could not come to Vellore. This is a picture of the Department of Orthopaedics. Dr. AJS is there. Do you recognize this person? I hope you do. Professor Gabriel David Sundarraj. And there's one other guy here you may not recognize. Okay, so quickly about Dr. Somerville. OBE FRCS, British surgeon and mountaineer. Yeah, he didn't go and climb the Toad Hill and all that. He climbed the Everest. So he was a painter of renown and of course a missionary. And he had 2 expeditions to the Mount Everest, and we'll come to that. He was given the Olympic gold medal. Those days they were giving gold medal for mountaineering as well. Became an associate professor at Vellore 1949 and retired in 1961. He was, of course, given the OBE. This picture, this looks like some ruffian, isn't it? That was Somerville when he was on the expedition to the Everest in the year 1924. He nearly died there of frostbite and things like that. That's why he looks like that. Hardly the picture of a great surgeon in Vellore. Now, I see a web of connections here. Cochrane, Paul Brand, Somerville, AJS, and the connecting thread is leprosy. That is how the department started. Leprosy. And now all these people kind of, I don't know, there was a divine way in which all these players came in to do that. Now come to Dr. M.B. Daniel, MS General Surgery and interestingly MS Orthopaedics. At that time, there were only general surgeons, but Dr. Daniel, when he was an associate professor, he went and did his MS Orthopaedics. He told us that. And in the year 1967, the department was divided into 3 units, Dr. Selvapandian, Dr. Daniel, and this person called Dr. M.S. Ghosh. M.S. Ghosh resigned after a few years, so the department became 2 units again. And we see that Dr. Selvapandian resigned in 82 and Dr. Daniel in 1985. And then, of course, G.D. Sundarraj took over the Orthopedic 1 and Ravi Korla took over the Orthopedic Unit 2. Now, let me talk briefly about Dr. M.E. Daniel. He was a very amazing person, but very much unlike Selvapandian. Meticulous in his patient preparation, long incisions, confident dissection, no fumbling, no doubts. And it was a great joy to assist him. Great joy to assist him. You saw everything in front of you. AJS, you didn't see anything. It was all by feel. Here, it was like a wonderful dissection for you. But the best part is he was so meticulous that you had no post-operative infection in his unit. Ortho 2, no infections. That was because of M.E. Daniel. And he was at that time, that is the late 70s, the only surgeon doing total hip replacements in South India, definitely. And very meticulous in patient preparation and in the surgery. Then in 1979, thereabouts, he went off to USA on sabbatical and came back and started scoliosis surgery with Harrington rods. He did a few patients with scoliosis with the Harrington rods, and that was very good for us to assist him in that. A few years later, he went off to Japan, I think, to do acupuncture. man of many parts. I'm amazed by Dr. Daniel's, thirst for doing things differently. Can you see yourself doing things like this? And a few years later, it was a familiar thing for us to see him with his faithful assistant, Dr. Rajaratnam, another very nice gentleman, carrying the equipment to the wards and elsewhere to do acupuncture. That's the picture of patients receiving acupuncture. Okay. So here was Dr. Daniel, and some people used to think it was funny, that he was doing all this thing, orthopedic surgeon doing all this stuff. But who cares? Patients came and they got treated. And Dr. Daniel was only one of two professors in CMC who wore a tie every day. He was a very dapper gentleman, very smart, dapper, young looking. Unfortunately, the picture I have is later years. And the thing I really wanted to tell you about was he cared for poor patients. He truly cared for poor patients, and he was liberal. That's the first boss who said, bring me the final bill, and he will write in his big hand, reduction of 100 rupees. The whole bill would be 125 rupees only. And he wrote 100 rupees. So, and then he will call his secretary, Shanti, give this fellow bus fare so that he can go home. You understand what I'm trying to say? He said, this hospital was built by Adaskada to take care of poor patients. I'm telling you this. This hospital where you're standing and living was built by Adaskada to take care of poor patients. And interestingly, he had close contacts with many prominent people in Vellore. And every now and then he'll contact them and ask for donations for helping some poor patient or something like that. And when these people came, they got A-grade care, a registrar attached to them for, whatever they needed and things like that. But I commend you that he was in contact with the townspeople. That was Dr. Daniel. He expected his trainees to follow his instructions very carefully. That was Dr. Daniel. And one of the pithy statements he had was, hard work never killed anyone. I stepped into his unit and he called me and he said, I expect you to work hard. Hard work never killed anyone. After his retirement from here, he went on to be advisor and mentor at the Ganga Hospital, Coimbatore. Even now, he's still attached to the hospital just as a mentor. That's the picture of Dr. Ebby Daniel. Mrs. Daniel was the one who took care of the annex. And there are many more things I could say, but then time has run out, so I better continue. There's some pictures about the way the department looked those days. This was the main board there, talking about orthopedics and reconstructive surgery. And now this Balkan frame bed, there were two in this famous S ward. S ward, I think, is still there, but this Balkan frame was very important because all patients with femur or tibia, femur fracture, basically hip fracture, femur fracture, were treated on traction treatment. One of the associate professors of pediatrics, he unfortunately had a IT fracture, and he also got treated with traction for 6 weeks. I won't mention his name, very famous person. Anyway, so the other thing that I wanted to say very quickly is that we admitted leprosy patients for surgery in S ward. Now, you think, so what's so great about it? No, it was not done anywhere in the world. Leprosy was not admitted to the general hospital. They had separate hospitals. But Dr. AJ said, no, my leprosy patients will be admitted in S ward. And so we had them, we had them various surgeries that they had. And so they were in S ward. And that was really something. Now, I've really run out of time, so I will rush through. So I unfortunately have to talk about a few of my contemporaries. Professor G.D. Sundarraj, who sadly left us in the year 2015. University gold medal in MS Orthopaedics. He was a protege of Dr. AJS, but he was very much a self-made man. And of course, he was, I think, Mr. Men's Hostel for many years in his undergrad days, and he was a bodybuilder. Staunch to his friends, but unrelenting to his enemies. He had a fantastic work ethic. Very, very hard-working person. He was a great teacher, as all will agree, and established the famous Ortho 1 pre-op rounds, which started around about 8 p.m. and went on till midnight or sometimes past midnight. And I'm sure Alfred remembers some of those. So he was instrumental in setting up the temper for learning in the Department of Orthopaedics. I think that is something that I would like to say. And he started the spinal disorders unit in CMC and the training program. He retired in 2011 and later worked in Nepal. Dr. George Alfred Anderson, sadly again, he is no more with us. And George joined the department 1 year after me, together with Dr. Ravi Korula. He took over the hand research unit as it was then in the year 1983. And of course, his tremendous contributions and achievements in hand surgery are legendary and well known. He laid the foundation for the MCH hand surgery that is now successfully training many young surgeons today. Some pictures of fellows you can't recognize today. This is a very rare picture of three of us together. And I think we are all smiling happily. This is in the big bungalow, wash area. Can you see the things there behind the? Okay. So George, though he could be very abrasive and abrupt, he is well known for his wit and humor too. And I would say if you were ever to be stranded on a desert island, George could make the time go by very quickly with his witticism, either as you die of thirst or perhaps rescued miraculously after a few days. That is George. And I'd like to think of him again like that. He definitely was a very bright brick in the heritage wall of CMC. Now, I won't talk about the orthopedic department of today. It's become, as Alfred said, a banyan tree. Maybe, I don't know if there's any other tree bigger than a banyan tree, but, it's growing day by day. And so from Bullock to robotics. So that's a picture that was sent to me very proudly by my friends here. And yes, we have come a long way thanks to our pioneers, our forefathers and mothers. And as Alfred said, we can see further because we are standing on the shoulder of giants. I mean, that is a statement that really is true here. And there is much more to be learned. Think of Paul Brand and Selvapandian and Daniel and others. There's much more to be learned to overcome pain and disability. And I just wanted to, the bane of orthopedics yesterday and today is still infection. And I'm reminded by this gentleman, Bhupalan, that we still don't know much about how infection happens. He told me that the polymorphonuclears, they carried the bugs into the bone. And I don't know, there must be more research that defines this thing more, how we can prevent it, because that would be a great thing. And definitely, Bhupalan was also involved with gut dysbiosis, and that's a very important thing. So what am I trying to say? There is much more that we can do with orthobiologics, this whole subject of orthobiology. And is something that we need to get into in a greater way. And of course, geriatric orthopedics is another subspecialty that needs to be developed. It's very different, and there is much to be talked about. No time for that. So the last, because I've truly run out of time, I'm reminded that the original motto of Hippocrates is good medicine treats an individual, not a bone, and certainly not merely a disease or a bone, but a whole individual. Let's not forget that. And I leave with this quotation from our Lord Jesus Christ. Do not forget your first love. We are treating patients. And as we were reminded by our seniors, this hospital was set up to treat the poor and the needy. Thank you very much.